Hello, everyone, and welcome to Blogging Theology. Today, I'm delighted to talk to Dr. Mohammed Ghaly. You're most welcome, sir.
Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum, and thanks for having me.
Walaikum assalam. Mohammed Ghaly is a professor of Islam and biomedical ethics at the Research Center for Islamic Legislation and Ethics at Hamad bin Khalifa University in Qatar. He has a BA in Islamic Studies from Al-Azhar University in Egypt and an MA and PhD in the same specialization from Leiden University in the Netherlands. Mohammed is the founding editor-in-chief of the Journal of Islamic Ethics, published by the prestigious academic publisher Brill. In September 2019, he became the founding program coordinator of the newly established MA program in Applied Islamic Ethics at Hamad bin Khalid University. Islamic ethics and its intersection with biomedical sciences is Mohammed's main research interest. He's the author of Islam and Disability, Perspectives in Theology and Jurisprudence, and the editor of the volumes Islamic Perspectives on the Principles of Biomedical Ethics, Islamic Ethics and the Genome Question, and End-of-Life Care, Dying and Death in the Islamic Moral Tradition. He's the author of more than 50 publications and an editorial board member of a number of academic journals. He's also the lead principal investigator and research consultant on a number of funded research projects related to the field of Islamic ethics. And his publications could be accessed in a link which I will put in the description below. Now, today, Dr. Mohammed Ghaly has kindly agreed to introduce us to the extremely important subject of Islam and bioethics, and to address questions such as what makes Islamic bioethics Islamic? And what kind of challenges do Muslim scholars have to deal with? And who speaks for Islamic bioethics? And also, Mohammed will say something about his organization's hosting the World Congress of Bioethics in Qatar, which will be the first time in the Arab world and indeed the whole Middle East. And it will also be the first to have the theme of religion, culture, and bioethics. And what's been particularly interesting is the blowback that you've received from bioethicists in the Netherlands about even hosting this conference in Qatar. But that's, well, you can explain in more detail the issues surrounding that issue. So would you like to just introduce us to this important subject?
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me again and for the interest in a topic and a subject which is near and dear to my heart. So not only my academic interest, but also my passion for years now. So I'm very happy to be the guest of this important channel, widely viewed program. So very happy to be with you.
Alhamdulillah, thank you for coming. So would you, just as lay people, men and women who have an intelligent interest in this subject, I mean, what is bioethics and what is Islamic bioethics? So how does that differ from a secular, perhaps, understanding of the subject?
Yes. So let's start first with explaining a little bit in simple terms what bioethics is. Bioethics is now a well-established field whose history, modern history, go back to the 60s and 70s. We can think of pioneers like Potter from the United States of America, the school from Georgetown University, the colleagues who established the Kennedy Institute of Ethics, and the whole idea behind the establishment or the emergence of this new field is that the questions raised by the breathtaking advancements in the field of biomedical sciences, these questions cannot be properly handled and examined and addressed by biomedical scientists only. So it needs specialists in ethics to deal with them. So to say what is good, scientifically speaking, and beneficial, medically and clinically speaking, is not necessarily also good, ethically speaking. Things are quite complex, so we need to address them also from an ethical question, from an ethical perspective. So things started around this time in the Muslim world. More or less around the same time, we started to have the same questions, especially when Muslim countries started to import these new biomedical technologies. Think of organ transplantation, assisted reproductive technologies, IVF, stem cell research, and all the stuff. So also they started to ask the same questions. We will see throughout our discussions that the approach was not always the same. Not only the difference between the religious and secular, but even the very approach itself, who is talking, how these discussions are happening, etc. But more or less around the same time, by the 1980s, we will have much more systematic discussions, institutionalized discussions in the Muslim world through the so-called Islamic fiqh academies. So it's about the modern biomedical revolution that we started to have, especially roughly speaking, the second half of the 20th century, which made us aware that we need to discuss the ethical implications of this biomedical revolution. And of course, each community and even each individual had to address these ethical dilemmas and ethically challenging questions through the lens of his or her own moral world.
So what is a particularly Islamic take on this? Because the Sharia, the body of Islamic law and guidance and so on, might not have much to say about stem cell research, for example, or in vitro fertilization, all these kind of revolutionary new techniques. So how does an Islamic, I mean, who in Islam would address these subjects? Presumably the Sharia scholars, but how would they do it? I mean, what methods, methodologies, concepts, techniques would they employ to deal with these emerging technologies?
Yes, and I think this question, it's very important to have historical awareness also. The birth of modern bioethics as we know now, or the ethical questions of the biomedical revolution, started to take a clear shape, as I mentioned, in the second half of the 20th century. So we have a biomedical revolution. But this was not the only context. There was also a very important context, which is the independence movement and decolonization in the Muslim world. Right. So the majority of the Muslim world was colonized.
Yes.
And there was an independence movement, and people, so the European colonization is leaving, military speaking at least, is leaving from the country. And there was a moment of discussing what our identity is, what makes us unique and different, why were we colonized, and how we can be independent now. And is it only a military thing or whatever, or is it much more than this? And yes. Then started the question is, what went wrong, and how can we fix it? So the dominant majority of religious scholars at this time, the simple answer to this question, what went wrong, is that Sharia was not central in our society anymore. We left it, we ignored it, and we cannot gain full independence without re-centralizing Sharia again. And
so then there's physical independence, military independence, political. There's also ideological independence and the reclaiming of an Islamic tradition, which had been, for various reasons, sidelined or ignored or even suppressed by the colonizers. So rediscovering the Islamic tradition anew, post-colonial.
But this was the narrative of the religious scholars. We have also the narrative of the secularists and the liberal, who would say that we have been colonized, etc., because we had too much religion. And if we want to be modern and to join this modern civilization, we have to do like Europe. The separation between religion and state, religion and science, religion and politics, and so on. And religion would move more to the private domain, etc. So you had this intense discussion within Muslim societies about this. Was reflected much more in around clearly specific questions like the evolution theory and the role of religion in that and all this stuff. But ethical questions raised by biomedical technology was a very important domain and applied field where religious scholars would try to prove their thesis, which was formulated in Arabic as Sharia صالحة لكل زمان ومكان. Sharia is valid every time and everywhere.
Right.
So then the very normal question I would say to you, okay, now the ethical questions triggered by the biomedical revolution. What does Islam say about it? What does Islam say about stem cell research? What does Islam say about cloning and this stuff? So give me an answer rooted in the Islamic tradition. And the majority of the religious scholars found it also interesting that we can do it. So the work, efforts, and time dedicated to this field from the religious scholars was not only because of the pressure coming from the biomedical revolution, but the pressure coming from what we mean by Sharia in our modern time. And what kind of questions can Sharia answer? And the concept of ijtihad.
This is quite key, the concept of ijtihad, which you've just mentioned. Could you tell us a bit more about that? Because this is really, obviously I'm a layman, I don't know, but is this the tool with which scholars can utilize an indigenous Islamic tool to engage with these new emerging issues? So what is ijtihad?
Yes, one of the key tools used in this regard and recalled at this time in the 1950s, 60s, and later was that the questions triggered by modernity and biomedical revolution is just one phenomena of this big modernity. So political scene was also changing. So we have a modern nation state instead of the empires before and the caliphate, etc. The banking system is also something new. They said all these, we can see them through the lens of the term known in Islamic history as an-nawazil, which can be literally translated as predicaments, new question, novel issues, unprecedented dilemmas, stuff like this. And they said, yes, the questions that trigger the biomedical revolution or modernity in general are new and maybe unprecedented before. We didn't have them. But is this the first time that religious scholars deal with questions that their predecessors did not have or did not even imagine? They said no. The phenomena of nawazil, novelty and novel questions, is a recurrent phenomenon in every generation. Each generation has its own new questions that the previous generation did not have. So what we need is to revive the concept of ijtihad, this independent ethical religio-ethical reasoning, so that we can provide answers informed by our ethical, religious, and moral tradition, like the previous scholars did. What was the new challenge for them? So they said, in this regard, we speak about a recurrent challenge, something that happens every time we have something new. The problem was, in order to do ijtihad, practice ijtihad, or this independent reasoning, you need two things. The first one is that you understand the question at hand. You know what this is because it's the new one. So it's not like a question, when I am praying, I forgot, is it 2 rak'ahs, 3 rak'ahs, etc. What should I do in this question? This is an old question and happens all the time. And all the seasonal questions we have about Ramadan, pilgrimage, and so on. No, this is a new one. So the possibility that I do not understand it is high.
Yes.
So first, I need to have what we call the right perception, التصور الصحيح, for the issue at hand. التصور الصحيح للمسألة. We must have this. In the case of the bioethical questions, I need to know the biomedical aspect of it. When I tell you, what does Islam say about organ transplantation? You need to know what is organ transplantation. What does this exactly mean? So I call this in my publications the informative component. You should have the right information on the table. And the second one is
the right expertise, which of course is a very specialized area. Organ transplants and IVF. These are not something you pick up by reading a just an article on Google. You've got this involves training, understanding of science, and so on. So this is quite a challenging thing to do.
Especially when we think back in the 1950s and 60s, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have the social media, we didn't have ChatGPT, so the tools were quite limited. So this is when having the right perception at hand, and the second one is the normative.
Right.
You give a normative judgment to say, okay, this is halal, haram, makruh, good, bad. You judge it ethically and religiously speaking. The contemporary religious scholars had a problem in this regard because the Muslim world was like the rest of the world. One of the implications of modernity was specialization. You cannot be good and scholar in everything.
Exactly.
You have to be specialized, and the more specialized you are, the better it is.
Yes.
So it's not just
medicine. It is for other people to understand it, but the more specialized is good. But then that creates an ivory tower effect because you're no longer easily accessible for other people because it becomes so specialized.
Exactly. That will be a problem for bioethics later. But normally speaking, in modernity, the standard practice is that you must have a specialization. So to start with, you are either in humanities or science.
Yes.
Within humanities, which humanities, and within science, which science, and within medicine, which medicine, are you neurologist, cardiologist, and so on.
Yeah.
So the religious education in the Muslim world was also formulated and shaped and structured according to these lines. I myself studied at Al-Azhar University. And when you are at the age of 14, 15, around this, you have to choose which track you are going to follow. So for instance, I want to be an engineer. I want to be a physician. Then you go to a specific track. We call it the scientific track, al-ilmi. You want to study Sharia. Then you go to the literary track, adabi. And you do this at the age of 15. So when you choose the literary track, like what I did, for instance, so you do not have any science. It's not one of the subjects that you study from the age of 15. And you don't have math. So you don't have physics, you don't have chemistry, you don't have biology, you don't have all this. And when it comes to the language, English will be very light. A couple of hours in the week, unlike the scientific track when you will have heavy English. So you can imagine the Sharia scholar, when he is or she is a graduate at the age of 22 or 23, it means you have been, since the age of 15, you didn't have any science. And if you want to be a scholar, so you will do master and PhD and so on. So you will be separated for decades from science. So when I tell you what is organ transplantation, you will not know what these people are talking about. So you will have a big problem. Not only understanding the direct question, but the broader context. So if I tell you, look, transplantation, we transfer a tissue or an organ from one body to another. You will tell me, okay, what's the difference between tissue and organ? And then I tell you, oh, tissue, these are cells, and the cells, you have DNA. And I say, oh, what is the cell and what's the DNA? These very basics, you do not have them. So it became a big problem when we started these discussions, bioethical discussions. And in order to solve the problem, you have two options. One of them is the long-term sustainable solution, is that you create these interdisciplinary figures, people who will study Sharia and science together, not to become scientists, but at least to have basic knowledge about what science is, especially modern science. And this will take time. And people cannot wait to develop this hybrid generation of hybrid knowledge. And after 15, 20 years, we will be able to answer these questions. And we don't know if this model of education will work or not. So we move to the mechanism of collective ijtihad. Instead of the individual ijtihad, we move to the collective ijtihad. That ijtihad is not practiced by one person, but by a group.
It's collaborative. So instead of waiting for this super intellectual who's conversant with all the fields. You have a collaborative, but this whole idea of, I mean, the integrative understanding of knowledge, of civilization is very Islamic, isn't it? There isn't this kind of split between religion and science in life, between the secular and the public. There is a sense of it's a holistic system. Where in the West it's become very split apart. So it's part of the DNA, to use a scientific metaphor, of the religion, I would suggest, to have an integrated understanding of life. So this split apart is something that sits very awkwardly, I think, in terms of an Islamic approach. So it's good to see that it's coming back together again in this collaborative method that you're talking of.
I would say the dying out of interdisciplinarity is one of the influences of modernity, not necessarily Western, Eastern. So we have seen this also in the Muslim world. It had found its way even in Al-Azhar, the religious institution. So you do not have, by time, so let's speak about the historical context we speak about, the second half of the 20th century, you will hardly find those scientists who are well-versed in Sharia, or the opposite. They are split, even if they are graduates of Al-Azhar. So you have this split. So in the West, in the East, it's modernity. It's the age of modernity, where specialization is much more honored than this interdisciplinarity. So there is no context that will create Ibn Rushd, for instance, who will be an authority in medicine and will write a textbook in medicine and will be authority in fiqh and will write also بداية المجتهد ونهاية المقتصد in fiqh. You do not have these hybrid people. Like Ibn al-Nafis, who is a well-recognized physician, but he's also included in the biographies of the Shafi'i scholars. In the Shafi'i school, he is recognized as a Shafi'i jurist, although he is a physician, and so on. You do not have this. So this was a problem. The solution was collective ijtihad.
Yeah.
In the 1980s, 1981 more specifically, we started to have discussions on modern bioethical questions through this mechanism of collective ijtihad in institutions. So we have the establishment of the Islamic Organization for Medical Sciences in Kuwait. And since the 1980s till now, they do nothing except bioethics from an Islamic perspective. So they don't discuss politics, they don't discuss divorce and marriage and all this stuff. Only things related to bioethics. In collaboration with two other important institutions, the one in Jeddah, International Islamic Fiqh Academy, one in Mecca, Islamic Fiqh Academy. All these three institutions are transnational and transdisciplinary.
Now, can I quickly ask, do these institutions publish in English, in the English language?
Especially in the beginning, the Islamic Organization for Medical Sciences, they would publish the proceedings of their symposia or conferences in both English and Arabic, and sometimes even in French. But by time, I think they realized that it is undoable. Also financially speaking, to translate everything and the quality, to guarantee the quality of translation and stuff like this. So you don't see this anymore later, with few exceptions.
You mean in Arabic? You mean only in Arabic now? You mean
only in Arabic? Yeah.
The great bulk. The problem, I mean, I don't need to tell you this, of course, but it seems to me, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the world language today for scientific discourse globally, academically, is English. And if
one of the problems,
if discourse in bioethics in the Muslim tradition is taking place in a language which is not accessible to most English-speaking peoples, then it's not accessible. So Western trained academics who want to learn about the Islamic bioethical tradition won't have access to that information if it's not in a language that they can read and understand. As an obvious point.
To problematize the situation more, it is not even accessible to the Arab-speaking.
Well, indeed.
So yes, it is in Arabic. Yes, it is in Arabic.
Interdisciplinary approach is great. Now you've got an integrated understanding, but it's not making the impact it might have on the global international academy and discussions, because it's not in a language people can access. So it seems that it hasn't quite got there yet.
No, these are so. If we speak about the pluses and minuses of this new approach, of course, one of the pluses and the good benefits of it is that you have a discourse.
Exactly.
That you have perspectives rooted in the tradition and all this stuff. You have good collaboration between, and you don't have these walls between scientists and religious scholars and so on. This is all great, and no question about it. But the problem is the impact. So to start with, not speaking about the global discussion, the least is that you provide answers to the physicians working in the Muslim world. This is the minimum, so that people can run the hospitals and stuff like this. With the exception of the physicians who participate in these discussions, I would say, I dare to say, that a great number of the physicians working in the Muslim world who are maybe Arab and they speak Arabic and so on, they cannot understand this material because it's a very heavy material in Islamic studies. So using fiqh and usul al-fiqh, Islamic legal theory, jurisprudence, it's quite technical.
It's too technical.
And very difficult to understand if you don't have strong Islamic studies background. So it needs translation, not only translation in language, but it's translation in concepts. And this gives, of course, someone like myself, my colleagues who are working on Islamic bioethics and they know Arabic, of course, a great privilege that they can make this bridge with the rest of the world and non-specialists in Islamic studies. But I agree, it is one of the big problems.
Now, you mentioned, I mentioned briefly at the beginning about your organization is hosting the World Congress of Bioethics in Qatar. This is the first time this happened in the Arab or the Middle East. And a basic question, will this be in English? Presumably it will be.
Yes, it will be in English.
Obviously you're involved in it and you're obviously fluent in English, which is great. I've just noticed, because you sent me an article beforehand, that just having this Congress on bioethics in Qatar, there was some considerable blowback, I'm calling it, from bioethicists in your country, Netherlands. So your country, one of the countries that you spent a lot of your time in. And that was could you just tell us a bit about that story, if you don't mind, and how it's been resolved, I think, if it is being resolved?
Yes. No, to start with, of course, it's great news for people in the Muslim world, great news for the bioethics scholarly community in general, worldwide. This means edition of the World Congress.
Yeah.
And it happens once every 2 years. So we speak about more than 30 years of conferencing. And this is the biggest gathering for bioethicists worldwide, and there is no second to it. So there is no competition between two institutions trying to represent the bioethics community. This is the biggest and the largest one. You can imagine for 16 editions, 30 years, never in the Arab world, never in the Middle East. Which is phenomenal, I would say. Yes. So when we applied, and we applied in collaboration with another institution also based here in Qatar called Well Innovative Summit for Health, WISH, the acronym. And we did it because they have big experience in organizing large-scale conferences. In our center, we usually organize academic conferences, but small-scale ones. But things like go beyond 1,000 and stuff like this, our partner, WISH, have much more expertise in this regard. When I applied, and I thought of applying to hosting the Congress, because I myself participated in previous editions before, because this is my field. I found it quite strange that never happened in the Arab and the Middle East, as if this is not world. So when we speak about World Congress, so this is not part of the world. We can continue being international without engaging with this part of the world. And also, never in the previous editions was the theme religion.
Really? Wow.
So it's not only about the geography, but about the concept, because the modern bioethics was born in a secularized world.
Yeah.
So where we realize, especially when it comes to science, religion is not part of it. So we separated religion from politics, separated religion from science, and so on. So bioethics, although in the very beginnings, religion was there, but by time, it became as secular as medicine itself. So if we want to do public reasoning or stuff like this, so we put our religious convictions aside and we go together. So I thought this will be very important opportunity for people in the Muslim world and in the Middle East to know that there is a secular mindset for this, and not everything is revolving around religion as they think here. And also the other part of the world, people in Europe and the US, will realize that there is a religious public reasoning, and that it's not like what we think in Europe and the US. Religion is not central in the public discourse anymore, and that we use always secular principles and modes of thinking.
If you say that, if I can push back against what you just said, in the United States, for example, the issue of abortion is immensely controversial and very central to the political discourse. A lot of people who are very pro-life in the United States are motivated by profound religious convictions, whether they be Christian, mostly, because it's a mostly Christian country, but also Muslims and other faith groups as well. So faith, religion, bioethics, abortion is political, is all wrapped up together in the United States. It's not kind of, I get your point about not in normative discourse in the academy, it's all separated out. But in terms of the political realities, it's a real hot button issue, particularly in America, to a lesser extent in Europe, much lesser extent, but it's still there-ish, actually, in France and Britain and so on. So I would push back against the idea that it's wholly separated out in the West, and that I know what you're getting at, but I think it's more complicated than that, particularly in America.
You are completely right. I agree. I'm just trying to explain why religion was not discussed. Right. Because the field was secularized in a specific moment in history. Yes. But it's true, we cannot speak about secular approach to all topics. So, for instance, stem cell research, when the administration of George W. Bush, the son, limiting stem cell research was motivated by Christian perspectives. So at this level, And some, by the way, to strikingly enough, I was in a conference in Riyadh around this time. This was 2003, 5, something like this, when this law was drafted in the United States. Many of the scientists who were working on stem cell research in the US started to move their activities to the Gulf region here, especially Saudi Arabia and Qatar, some of them. Why? Because the religious perspective to embryonic stem cell research from an Islamic perspective is much more permissive than the Catholic one. So they found that this will be more conducive and welcoming to their research, and they moved here, their activities, scientific activities. So yes, religion is not isolated, has never been isolated, especially with some topics. And even in Europe, you cannot say that the significance of religion in countries like the Netherlands, Sweden, and Finland is the same like Italy and Spain, for instance. Also not the same. The significance of religion is more. But these are all nuances. But when we speak about the field of bioethics in general, the main activities are Western academia.
True.
And Western academia and their approach to bioethics is secular. They will deal with the religious approach in the field as minority. So when I was living in the Netherlands, I was teaching a guest lecture in almost all colleges of medicine in the Netherlands. But in a course about culture and bioethics, something like this, and you will have only one class, and you will be asked all the time about the exotic issues. Stories that hit the headlines in the newspapers. A pregnant woman who's going to deliver, and then suddenly the husband says, "Oh, male doctor shouldn't help my wife," and then the wife is in danger and the baby is in danger, etc. And then we say, "Dr. X, what does Islam say about such a thing?" Okay, here comes the Islamic bioethics. But when we discuss, for instance, the big values, what do we mean by autonomy? What do we mean by justice? How to define these big principles? You are not on the table, because we know how to handle this from a secular perspective. And the secular perspective, by default, is universal, is accessible to everyone. But religious ethics is a particular morality. Is not universal morality. This is usually the assumption.
This is not. Yeah, that's the assumption, but of course that's not necessarily true. Of course, because the assumption of bodily, or you mentioned autonomy, bodily autonomy, the sense that I own my own body, it's my body, I can do with it as I please, feeding into, of course, a woman's right to choose when it comes to abortion up to birth, as it is in the United States, is a profoundly philosophical idea rooted, I would argue, in kind of post-Enlightenment Western tradition, which has its roots in people like John Locke and Kant and Rousseau and so on. And it's very secular. Of course, in Islam, it's completely different. The Quran is very explicit that the universe, everything in the universe, including ourselves and our bodies, is owned by God. But we are not the owners of ourselves, because we are God's property, if you like. We are, and He is God. He is the Lord. That's a very different premise to begin with when it comes to what we do with our bodies ethically, isn't it? And the Western idea presents itself as you're right, as universal, axiomatic, based on human rights. But actually, I would argue it's rooted in very particular intellectual tradition in the West. There's a genealogy that you can trace all the way back to certain philosophers, certain thinkers, even back to ancient Greece, back to Aristotle and so on. And it's not universal. It's not Chinese. It's not Islamic. It doesn't come from sub-Saharan Africa. All these different civilizations, different worldviews, different philosophies and assumptions about what it is to be human, what it is to be a being in the world that is a divine creation. So there's a long way of saying that secularization, despite what it claims to be, is not neutral and objective to the extent that it has these assumptions about reality, about the life, the universe, and everything. That would be my...
Yes, it's good that you mentioned this example of autonomy. We can say a few things about it. In Islam, the issue is much more nuanced, that I have autonomy over my body or not. It's not that simple. Like abortion, pro-life, pro-choice. In Islam, much more nuanced and complex than that. So when we speak about autonomy, for instance, the belief itself, aqeedah, is based on autonomy. Without autonomy, there is no belief. I have to choose. I have to be able to choose that I believe in God or I do not believe in God. If I don't have this autonomy, it doesn't make sense that I believe. But once I commit myself to believe in God, it comes with it specific limitations for my autonomy. Like, for instance, I choose to be an American citizen. I may choose not to be. I'm living in America, I got the green card, and now it's my right to get the citizenship. We say, okay, for citizenship, for instance, you can be summoned to serve in the army. But I'm a pacifist. I don't like that, and I don't want to be committed. Okay, then you say, I will not accept it. So you commit yourself to a system of belief. It means your autonomy will not be the same. Your autonomy will never be the same like the person who does not commit himself or herself to this system of belief. So there is, first of all, God's permission. Number one, without God's permission, you cannot touch your body. Like in euthanasia, you want to actively terminate your life. We say you cannot do that because the author of life is the one who can decide about its end.
That's why suicide is forbidden. It's haram because we're not the author of our life. It's a gift from God, and therefore autonomy there doesn't exist. There is no autonomy.
No. There is no autonomy in this sense.
In this
there is
sense.
no autonomy in this sense. But there is autonomy. So yes, we are not the owners of our bodies, but we are the trustees of our bodies. أمناء على الجسد. And I am the only trustee over my body as an adult person. So the physician does not have higher authority over my body than myself. Nobody has. Why? Because I am the one who will be held accountable before God about what I did with this trust, with this amana. He gave it to me, not to someone else. So I can say to the physician, don't touch my body. Will say, if I do not interfere, your health will be at risk. I say, I don't care. It's not your business. Why? Because it's my responsibility. It's my autonomy. And that's why we find in Islamic jurisprudence, even classical discussions, we don't have this concept of autonomy, but we have the concept of permission, al-izn, that for the physician to interfere in one's body, you must have permission from the person, al-izn.
Right.
We have this from the earliest books written about it, like Adab al-Tabib by al-Ruhawi, the etiquettes of the physician, works of Islamic jurisprudence, and so on. And this is all autonomy, but not the autonomy that we understand in the secular sense. And so things are quite
philosophical autonomy in a deeper sense, rather than in the sense you mean. Of course, that is entirely proper and indeed a very civilized way of going about things. But the deeper sense of our philosophical and metaphysical autonomy over against God in a purely secular paradigm is that was getting at, because that informs, I think, a lot of ethics in the West on many issues, not just on the medical field, but in other fields as well.
That's the problem. I would say that modern discourse of bioethics is an amazing discourse, added much to modern human thinking, but it has lost much of richness by not getting insights from religious moral traditions. It would have been much richer than it is now. So we have very few things integrated into the mainstream bioethical discourse from religion, like the double effect from the Catholic, for instance. You will have it in secular bioethical discourse, which has roots in religious traditions. But beyond this, there is this feeling that we know it. We know how to do it. So we do not need religions to help us in this regard. And I say this a big mess in the secular bioethical discourse, and I hope that having the World Congress of Bioethics in as a Muslim majority country in the Middle East, in the Arab world, that it will help this mutual understanding, so that secular bioethicists can learn from the religious discourse, and religious bioethicists would learn from the secular bioethical discourse, and so on. But if you would like to speak about the controversy, we can also get into the controversy.
Yes, but before we get to that, I do want to get to that, because I think it really illustrates the context in which this conference is happening, and it suggests all sorts of Orientalist tropes and so on. But come to that in a second. So I just want to come back to what you said, because bioethics is not just an obscure area of intellectual medical concern. The whole idea now in the West is almost normative, that if I was a 10-year-old boy, and I just think one day, well, actually, I'm a girl, and I want to have surgery. I want to have puberty blockers. I want to do this. I want to change my body. For many people now in the West, many countries in the West, is now a legal right for that kid, that child, to actually go ahead and materially, access so-called medical care. I say so-called advisedly. To actually stop nature's natural processes as a boy or as a girl. And this is ethical. This is ethics. It involves medicine, but it also involves a profound understanding of what it is to be human, what it is to be a male or female. And Islamically, obviously, we're made either male or female. It says so in the Quran in several places. So this is where religion and ethics and contemporary issues really collide very hard on. And then coming on to your World Congress of Bioethics in Qatar, you've had some criticism, public criticism from bioethicists in the Netherlands, I understand, who've written a letter. I think you call it a letter, criticizing Qatar for a whole bunch of reasons, some of which is to do with alleged economic injustices, whatever, but also because of basically like the World Cup issue. This is like a World Cup part 2, isn't it? Where the media, the Western media that is, were very critical of Qatar for a whole bunch of reasons, not least because their views on LGBTQ and all that. And I think Qatar did remarkably well, by the way, in terms of dealing with that onslaught from a West which feels it can dictate to the Muslim world what it should believe and how it should run its affairs. But have you experienced something on a smaller scale, perhaps, of this in the blowback from some Western bioethicists about this conference being hosted in your country?
Yes, I would like to say first that the reaction from the colleagues bioethicists around the world has been so far overwhelmingly positive, so or at least neutral, right. Because this is the 17th edition, and it is not the first time to have the Congress in a country that we, as ethicists, philosophers, bioethicists, healthcare professionals, that we think this country is not human rights friendly, for instance, or has problems, or I have objections, I have concerns, whatever. This happened many times. This is not the first time, and we will always have. So if I am from this part of the world, from the Muslim world, and the Congress will be in the US, I will say, oh, but what about the mass shootings? Is it safe that I go there? Maybe we will have a mass shooting during the Congress. I will have concerns about physical safety and so on. Countries that are, for instance, sending troops to kill people in the Muslim world. Should I go to these countries as a Muslim? And so we have these discussions all the time. But this case, first of all, it's the first. So you will have questions about the first time in the Arab world, first time in the Middle East. So it's normal that it will raise questions. And it came directly after the World Cup. So we are living in what I usually say to my students, World Cup syndrome. So we are all influenced by the World Cup syndrome and all the discussions and polarizing discussions about these issues. But for the World Congress, I would say, look, World Congress of Bioethics is never hosted by a country. It's hosted by an institution.
Right.
So as an international association of bioethics, I don't say the Qatar government or the German or Swiss government applies, and then I give you the right to host it. It's not like the World Cup. Yes, it's the biggest conference in the field, but it is a field-specific congress. So bioethicists only will attend, not sport people or anyone else. So we should look into the institution. Does the institution have enough scholarly infrastructure to host it or not? That's the question. We have concerns about human rights, academic freedom, etc. Check the history of the institution and find, do they speak about these issues that you have concerns about? And we wrote in the article extensively that there is the level of academic freedom that makes us eligible to host the World Congress, and that nobody will be censored and so on. So this is what we need to think about as bioethicists. What should we do about this? Like the example you mentioned about sex change surgery, for instance, changing my sex, or LGBT, or women's rights, whatever. As a bioethicist, I cannot solve everything, and nobody is expecting this from me. But what I need to do, what is my added value now, is that, for instance, we ask the question: do women have equal access to healthcare like men? Yes, this is a bioethical question and a valid one. And it should be possible to discuss. And if not, then I will have a problem. If I am part of the board, if I'm a board member of the International Association of Bioethics, I want to make sure that this is the case. Would my sexual orientation be inhibitive for me to have rights and access to health care? These issues, yes, these are bioethical issues, and we have to discuss them, and we have to find solutions for the people to discuss them. But as a bioethicist, I would say it's not my position and not what people expect from me that I say to you, look, your country, according to my criteria, is not civilized enough to host the World Congress. Okay, what is your criteria? And I put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things like women, migrant workers, LGBT, whatever you want to add. Being friendly to the Muslim world, not killing civilians, not using drones in Afghanistan, whatever condition you want to add. And you say, go to your government, change the laws in your country until I find them civilized enough, and then I will give you the right to host the World Congress. Not accepted language. And I don't think it is good for the field of bioethics, because simply, first of all, as bioethicists, it's very difficult to agree on such a list.
Yes. Well, what is the criteria? I mean, one group will say, well, do you drone foreign powers? Do you invade? Do you have mass shootings in your country? Do you try and impose your ideology on other nations? Hint, hint. That these are criteria that matter. Another bunch will say, well, what about LGBT rights? Does your country support the right of 5-year-olds to change their sex without telling their parents, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? But I mean, wow, these are the issues of the moment, and how can that they deserve a separate conference in themselves? So to make those, I think what you're saying is to make these the defining criteria from whether or not an independent institution, independent of government, which yours is, to make these the criteria, well, an institution should host it is an impossible thing, because you would never have an agreed list of criteria between the Holland, the Dutch bioethicists and the Saudi bioethicists and the American bioethicists. Goodness knows what the Chinese bioethicists would say as well. So you would never have this agreement, would you? Presumably. So there has to be some other way of dealing with this issue. Otherwise, you're never going to meet in the first place, are you?
Yes. No. Look. There is inside each and every one of us, especially in the field of bioethics or in ethics in general, there is this little activist. Not the academic, but the activist. I want to have a better world. Not only that I want to publish good articles, but I want that the ethics that I study make the world a better place to live in. So I have this activism, and I'm sure the Dutch colleagues also have this. And that's what motivated them. That's fine. That's all fine. But being an activist, this is something. And being a bioethicist in academic and scholarly field called bioethics is something else. And if you mix both, you will not have a field. So we will not be able to continue our academic and scholarly work. If I watch news on CNN or Al Jazeera or whatever, I have a problem personally. I cannot work for a couple of days because I'm not happy with what's going on. But I have to continue my work because this is how I can contribute to the improvement of the situation we are living in. So I cannot wait till the US is an ideal country so that I can deal with colleagues in the US or Australia or the Netherlands or whatever. We have our work that we need to focus on to improve it, to make a better field, a truly global field of bioethics. And this is the minimum that we can do. If we can do more by collaboration together, that's fine.
I think I mean, yes, I think that's a very good solution. I was just thinking, perhaps rather cynically, that it used to be said that to give an analogy with sport, global sport, whether it be football or golf or whatever, there's no politics in sport. We should keep politics out of sport. So we have there was a German football player, a Muslim German football player who said something quite publicly about the Palestinians or had some, and he was roundly criticized for bringing politics, controversial issues into sport. You shouldn't do that. And he was roundly criticized. And then you have, of course, the German team having LGBT armbands or something during the Qatar World Cup, or being very publicly pro-Ukrainian because of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Now politics is very much a part of sport when it comes to Western foreign policy objectives like on Ukraine or ideological issues like LGBT. All that is perfectly acceptable in sport, and it's promoted. The BBC promoted this, I noticed. But 5 minutes before that, it was, we can't have politics in sport. We can't have these divisive issues. promoted in sport. We can't have it in football. We can't have it in, all that. And I'm thinking, wow, where did that happen? The double standards, the hypocrisy, of course, it's led by a Western agenda all the time. Yes, we mustn't have football, we mustn't have politics in sport, except when we, the West, decide we can. And then, because it's a worthy cause, we must have LGBT in sport, we must have pro-Ukrainian publicity and slogans and propaganda in sport. But what's this got to do with sport? What is an invasion in that part of the world got to do with sport? Nothing to do with sport at all. But it has now, because the power brokers have decided to bring it in. And I'm saying I'm being cynical about this, because everyone can agree, I think, in what you've just said, except until certain people decide, well, actually, we're going to have political criteria after all. And unless the Muslim world endorse X, brackets, gay marriage, LGBT, actually, we're not going to have them in your countries. You know what I mean? It's not really a level playing field, and the agendas sometimes get imposed even when you've disavowed them in theory, if that makes sense.
Yes. Look, this is part of my personality. I always would like to see the best of the people that I'm in conversation with or debating with. I do not always get from the bad intentions. So putting aside possible influences like being racist, Islamophobic, whatever, putting these things aside, because it's very difficult to verify. And I always want to have the good part in the people. جانب الخير في الناس, the good part in the people. I would say, why do we have these problems? Why do we have these problems? Because we don't have good dialogue. Mm-hmm. When I am sitting, so imagine I'm at Leiden University discussing with my colleagues at Leiden about whatever topic in bioethics or in human rights, whatever, like let's say, for instance, homosexual marriage, whatever. And we agreed that this is good. This is good. It is a good thing. And let the people have their individual liberties and so on, because it's part of the individual freedoms. Why not? So you can decide to marry, and you can decide to marry who? Male, female, whatever. And we agreed together. The problem is that we come to the conclusion it's not only good for us, it's good for everyone. So it's not only particular morality or secular morality, but universal morality. And those who do not agree with us, with the best goodwill, I would say not civilized enough.
Yes.
And we are just waiting for them to take this step, and we are pushing to make them do this step as soon as possible, so that we will be all civilized. But if I sit with others, we may think differently. Like, for instance, I'm a religious person. I do not have this unlimited scope of autonomy. So I have accountability before God. So if I have a text in my religion saying this or that, I have to respect it. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense that there is the religion and that there is a scripture and so on. Okay, and then I ask you, what is the common sense here? Why is this the case? I can tell you, there is the value of a family. And there is no family without marriage institution. In marriage institution, there are mutual rights and obligations, etc. I'm sure with this dialogue, it's not necessarily that we will agree on everything, but at least we will have this epistemic humility. That we know that, yes, I am right, but maybe these people also have something to say. The problem is that in Europe and the United States, if we agree, at least the majority, we think, okay, this is the norm, this is the standard, and everyone should listen. And this is a big problem. So the ethical discourse is not global. Bioethical discourse is not global. And then we think it is global. And it is a fallacy. And here comes the problem.
No, I agree. I hear that you want to be and positive in your estimation of people, and that's a very good thing. But when I look at what's going on in France and other countries, the sense of natural superiority, the values of civilization, and this discourse is used not just on the right, it's on the left as well. This seems to be across the board agreement that French values are the civilized values. For example, I'm not picking on France, I'm giving it as an obvious example. It's not only that country at all. It makes the genuine kind of respectful dialogue that you're speaking of rather difficult, because you say you don't want to impute racism or Islamophobia or Orientalism into this ideology, but it kind of is there, isn't it? Orientalism is obvious. You don't need to be a doctor of Islamophobia to spot it. If I had my way, every Frenchman and woman would read Edward Said's book, Orientalism, just to remind them that there is another way of seeing the world that's not just the French way. But that's my thing. So I'm just trying to say that even with the best will in the world, which clearly you have, there's still quite a mountain to climb, I would argue, when it comes to the hubris of many Western countries in regards to what is civilized, and that's what is to be expected in terms of ethical outcomes, ethical dialogues. And unfortunately, the asymmetry there of power and hegemony is still very striking, I would say, in today's world.
Yes, but I also have to say something about this. Why is not the bioethical discourse global, or not global enough? Of course, part of it because we are not doing well in the West. We are not having a dialogue on the basis of equality and mutual respect and so on. Yes, we can be criticized, and I consider myself as someone who has been living in the Netherlands, got my education there and so on. It's something that we can be criticized for. But also putting myself in the Muslim world, I'm also part of this Muslim world. There is also criticism. Like, for instance, I can ask you, in my capacity as a German or American or Swiss bioethicist, where is your bioethics? Where is this that I have to engage with? In the West, you have a very strong academic infrastructure. So there is hardly any, I cannot think of any college of medicine or hospital with no professor and team of bioethicists. You have that. Here in this part of the world, yes, I am professor, as you introduced me, of Islam and biomedical ethics. Okay, how many do we have in the Muslim world? To be honest, I don't know any with this title. But does this mean that we do not have bioethics? Yes, we have. But for instance, colleges of Sharia, I am part of the College of Islamic Studies, but not every college of Sharia would have someone who would completely dedicate it to this topic. So they will make it, for instance, in their PhD dissertation. A professor will write a book, and then we'll go further with other things. So you do not have this specialization, this infrastructure like what we have in the West. It's fragmented. It is not focused. And that's why we do not have, you asked me, are these councils publishing in English? They are not publishing in English, although it is an international language. So this also is hindering the dialogue. But on the other hand, I have also to say, why do I have to learn English and you do not have to learn Arabic?
I know.
If you want to know about the Muslim world.
Absolutely. And I was aware of that when I was saying that. I was aware I was making an Orientalist point, actually. But I was also aware, though, that I was making a realpolitik point as well, in that, although you're right, there's an obligation for them to learn Arabic too. But in terms of, as I mentioned, the asymmetry of power, the hegemony of the West at the moment, that is the case.
Yeah, no, we tried to solve this problem in the World Congress a little bit, because I had discussions with the International Association of Bioethics in this regard. So, for instance, for the first time, we will have a number of panels in Arabic in the Congress. This will be the first time also. It was always in English, even when it was in Argentina or in China. Everything was in English all the time. I said, if you want to know about the discussions within the community of the host institution, you have to let them speak in their own language.
Absolutely.
So that you understand. So we said that we will have these panels in Arabic with English translation, so that also the others can understand. And they found it a good idea, and they said we make it like a standard practice every time. So if we are in China, then we have a couple of panels in Chinese, and if we are, for instance, in India, we have a couple of panels in their own language, and so on. So this would help a little bit. But if I want to speak about to specialize in African bioethics, it's not possible that I don't know any African language. Mm-hmm. And I expect that they will make everything for me in English because I am living in the United States. Of course not. If you want Arabic is not a local language. Mm-hmm. Arabic is the lingua franca of Islamic studies. So you cannot say that I'll be able to be very much a specialist in Islamic studies, and I don't know Arabic, I don't know Urdu, I don't know Persian, any of the Islamic languages, and still everything's fine. Not all. If I want to specialize in Greek philosophy, and I don't know any Greek, okay, how can I claim that I am a specialist? So languages sometimes is also important, but there are, to put it short, there are things for which Western and secular bioethics to be criticized, and there are also things for which Islamic bioethics and how the bioethical discourse in the Muslim world is running also to be criticized.
Now, this attitude of yours is actually quite positive because pointing a finger at the other side and saying, these are your faults. You're saying, no, we have issues, you have issues. In other words, you're creating in terms of the blame culture, if you like, you're creating a level field. We all have issues we need to deal with. And that kind of takes away the any potential polemical or antagonistic kind of agenda there. So I think that more ironic approach might win over people better.
Yes, I think I had this also developed it maybe because of my personality and character, but also because of how I lived. So half of my life in the Arab world, the other half is in the West. So I have also seen both sides. They made what I am now. So maybe that's the reason. If my Dutch colleagues who wrote their article spent a great deal of their life in Saudi Arabia or United Arab Emirates or Qatar, maybe they would have also thought differently. Who knows?
Okay. So when is the World Congress of Bioethics taking place?
It's between the 2nd and the 6th of May, 2024, next year.
No, so I've got a year to go. Okay.
Yes.
That'll be interesting. I hope that gets a lot of attention on social media and online as well, because I think it is a significant paradigm shift and indeed it's the first time it's ever taken place in the Middle East as well. So much overdue, clearly. And I wish you obviously very well for that. And perhaps we'll draw to a conclusion, but I just wanted to stress, as I mentioned at the beginning, that you have authored a number of publications in English as well, and these can be accessed via a link which I'll put in the description below to academia.edu, but I'll put the link in the description below. Just to conclude, if we may, is there anything you want to share with us in terms of what we as lay people, if you like, non-specialists, should understand about Islam and bioethics as a takeaway? How should we remember what you've said, and how should we think about this ongoing in terms of the issues?
Yeah, again, to put things simple, Muslims, like any other human beings, they have their own moral world. This moral world is a complex one, vast structure. Part of it is religious, for sure, but not only. So there is a cultural, social part. There is a part related to our age, our social status. My moral world as a husband is different than my moral world as a father, as a colleague at work, and so on. So in order to handle the ethical dilemmas and ethically challenging questions coming from the ongoing biomedical revolution that we are living in, people need to check their moral world to know what is good and what's bad, what is doable, what is not doable, etc. And Muslims are doing the same. The problem is that in order to answer these questions, the answers are not ready-made. So you cannot go to the Quran directly and then you will find the answer, or the Sunnah. There is a level of ijtihad, of heavyweight reasoning that should be done. This heavyweight reasoning necessitates involving people from different disciplines, only religious sciences and not only Sharia, but also people from biomedical sciences. I would even say more, people from philosophy of science, people from different domains, in order to have a rich bioethical discourse. And understanding this discourse, understanding its historical roots, understanding its engagement with the different disciplines inside and outside the Islamic tradition, is the thing that I'm doing on a daily basis. And I'm very, very happy to be a fortunate person to be paid for exercising his passion, things that I enjoy doing. So this is my work, and this is what I'm doing. And I hope that my publication, my media appearances like this one, I don't do that much, but because I have also my students, and I have my academic projects, and I have my children as well to take care of at home. So, but I hope these both academic publications, media appearances, etc., will help people, not only Muslims, but people in general, to understand how this world religion, like Islam, interacts with these ethically challenging questions, big questions in our life, and to make you, as a physician, as a healthcare professional, as someone who tries to understand why people behave in the way they do, that my work will be of help in this regard, and that we can have a bit more understanding for each other than what it is the case at the moment in our very polarized and polarizing world where we are living in.
Indeed. Gosh. Well, I do commend you for your outstanding work, Professor Mohammed Ghaly, and I also very grateful for your time. You mentioned all your many commitments, academic and personal, that you have. So very grateful that you can share with us your expertise. And I certainly, and I hope many other people as well, will be watching what you do and your work with increasing interest. And Islam is not going away. Islam is a growing religion globally. It's growing very fast in the West. So we all need to be aware of the ethical and moral dimensions to Islam when it deals with these new issues in bioethics. So it really is a very important subject, and will be increasingly more important, if you like, as the years go by, for those reasons. So thank you very much indeed for your time, sir. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and wish you all the best. Assalamu alaikum.
Until next.